I've had enough. I want a divorce.
Fine.
The company is protected.
And worth far more than we expected.
Alexander Hall was 42 years old, a structural engineer in Denver who looked like the kind of man people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. His neighbors believed he had settled for an ordinary life. Aubrey, his wife of 12 years, had slowly come to believe the same thing. He drove an aging Ford F-150, carried a homemade lunch every morning, and still wore the same repaired steel watch he'd owned since college. What they didn't know was that Alexander quietly owned one of Colorado's most profitable boutique structural engineering firms. The truth stayed hidden until Aubrey slid divorce papers across the kitchen island and whispered, "I've had enough. I want a divorce." Alexander placed his coffee mug down without spilling a drop, looked into her eyes, and answered, "Fine. If you're watching today, I'd love to know where you're joining from. Leave a comment with your country and your local time. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy slow-burning stories where patience, truth, and quiet strength change everything, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story may challenge the way you see an ordinary person. Forever. The divorce papers remained exactly where Aubrey had left them. They sat on the polished quartz kitchen island beneath the warm pendant lights, untouched until the next morning. Alexander Hall walked past them before sunrise, carrying the same insulated lunch bag he had used for nearly 8 years. He poured fresh coffee into a stainless steel travel mug, locked the front door behind him, and drove toward downtown Denver in his faded blue Ford F-150. He didn't look back. To Aubrey, his silence was confirmation. She had expected questions. She had expected bargaining, maybe even tears. Instead, she received one word: "Fine." It irritated her more than any argument ever could. As Alexander merged onto Interstate 25, the city skyline slowly emerged against the pale orange horizon. Every morning followed nearly the same routine. He listened to local traffic reports instead of music. He arrived at Hall Structural Consulting before 7. He reviewed engineering drawings before anyone else entered the office. Routine had never bored him. Routine built bridges that stayed standing. Routine kept buildings from collapsing. Routine had quietly built his entire life. 12 years earlier, none of that had mattered. Back then, Aubrey Collins had fallen in love with a man who made her feel safe. She had been 29, energetic, ambitious, and newly promoted as a pharmaceutical sales representative for one of Colorado's fastest-growing healthcare companies. Alexander had already been an experienced structural engineer. He wasn't charming in the traditional sense. He didn't dominate conversations. He didn't flirt. Instead, he listened. He remembered small details. He arrived exactly when he promised. When Aubrey's apartment heating system failed during one of Denver's coldest winters, Alexander didn't complain about the late-night phone call. He drove 40 minutes through snow. He brought portable heaters. He stayed until sunrise. He never mentioned it again. That quiet reliability became the foundation of their relationship. The proposal happened on a hiking trail overlooking Red Rocks Park. No expensive photographer. No orchestra. Just 2 people watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. Aubrey had once told her friends that simplicity was romantic. Years later, simplicity became embarrassment. The change wasn't sudden. Alexander noticed it the way engineers noticed tiny cracks inside concrete. One by one. Small enough to ignore. Dangerous when connected. At first, Aubrey simply upgraded her wardrobe. Then came designer handbags, luxury vacations, exclusive restaurants. None of those things bothered Alexander. She earned her own income. She had every right to enjoy it. But the conversations slowly changed. Instead of asking how his projects were progressing, Aubrey started asking why he never wanted anything expensive. Kevin just bought his wife a Range Rover. Melissa and Brian are flying to Italy again. Did you see the new neighborhood in Cherry Hills Village? Alexander usually smiled. If it makes them happy. That answer frustrated her. She wanted ambition. He offered contentment. She wanted comparison. He ignored competition. The distance between them grew quietly. Every Friday evening, Aubrey attended networking dinners with colleagues from her pharmaceutical company. Alexander rarely joined. Large social gatherings exhausted him. He preferred finishing blueprints before Monday morning. At first, Aubrey defended him. He's just different. Later, she stopped explaining. Eventually, she laughed with everyone else. Alexander never heard those conversations, but he saw their effects. One evening, she returned home carrying shopping bags from Cherry Creek Shopping Center. She glanced at his pickup truck parked outside. "You know," she said casually, "people assume we're struggling financially." Alexander looked up from the dinner he had prepared. "Do they? You could at least buy something newer. It still runs." "That's not the point." He nodded once. "I know." She waited for more. Nothing came. That silence slowly became the villain in Aubrey's version of their marriage. By the 10th year, many of her friends believed Alexander lacked drive. None of them knew his actual work. Hall Structural Consulting occupied the 4th floor of an ordinary office building near Union Station. No giant company logo, no luxury reception area. Most clients came through referrals from architects, municipalities, and commercial developers. Alexander preferred it that way. He believed expensive offices impressed investors. Strong engineering impressed clients. He reinvested nearly every dollar into the business. Better software, additional engineers, advanced structural analysis systems, emergency reserve funds. His accountant often joked that Alexander spent money only when mathematics forced him to. The joke wasn't entirely wrong. Alexander believed financial freedom came from invisible decisions, not visible purchases. Meanwhile, Aubrey's career accelerated. She became regional pharmaceutical sales manager. Her annual bonuses exceeded what many families earned in a year. Her company rewarded appearances, luxury hotels, business-class flights, fine dining, recognition ceremonies. The environment slowly reshaped her expectations. She no longer compared Alexander to the man she married. She compared him to executives' husbands, to startup founders, to physicians, to investment bankers. Comparison quietly erased gratitude. Alexander recognized the pattern. He simply refused to chase it. One Saturday afternoon, Aubrey hosted brunch for 4 coworkers. Alexander repaired a loose deck railing in the backyard, while laughter drifted through the open kitchen windows. As he tightened another bolt, he heard someone ask, "So, what exactly does Alexander do again?" Another voice answered before Aubrey could. "I think he's just an engineer." Just. The word hung in the air. Alexander paused for less than a second before finishing the repair. He felt no anger, only disappointment. Not because strangers underestimated him, because Aubrey never corrected them. That evening after everyone left, she barely mentioned the gathering. Neither did he. The following months became colder, not with shouting, with absence. She traveled more. He worked longer hours. They occupied the same house while living separate lives. When Aubrey finally announced she wanted a divorce, Alexander wasn't shocked. He had seen the fracture spreading long before the wall finally cracked. The only surprise was how convinced she seemed. Convinced he would panic. Convinced he would negotiate. Convinced he would sacrifice everything to keep the marriage alive. Instead, the next morning, Alexander made one phone call before arriving at his office. "Lawson Family Law?" "Good morning," he said calmly. "My name is Alexander Hall. I'd like to schedule a consultation." The receptionist found an opening for Thursday afternoon. He thanked her. Nothing more, no urgency, no anger, just another appointment added to the calendar. 3 days later, Alexander walked into a modern brick office overlooking Civic Center Park. Victoria Lawson had practiced family law for nearly 25 years. She had represented CEOs, physicians, entrepreneurs, professional athletes, and ordinary couples who simply stopped loving each other. She had learned something important. The quiet clients were often the most prepared. Alexander placed a slim leather portfolio on her conference table. Victoria studied him for a moment. "You seem remarkably calm." Alexander folded his hands. "I've had some time to think." She nodded. "Then let's begin with a simple question." She opened a yellow legal pad. Her pen hovered above the first blank line. "Mr. Hall?" She looked directly into his eyes. "Do you know what your wife believes you actually own?" Victoria Lawson did not answer her own question. She simply watched Alexander Hall. 25 years of practicing family law had taught her that silence revealed more than cross-examination ever could. Angry clients usually filled empty space with accusations. Frightened clients filled it with excuses. Alexander did neither. He leaned back slightly in the leather conference chair and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Civic Center Park. Snow still clung to the distant peaks beyond downtown Denver, though spring had already arrived in the city below. Finally, he smiled. "I believe she thinks we own one house, 2 retirement accounts, 1 joint savings account, and my salary." Victoria lowered her pen. And she believes my engineering firm belongs equally to both of us." "You don't sound worried." "I'm not." She had expected confidence. She had not expected certainty. Victoria folded her hands together. "Mr. Hall, confidence is usually expensive in divorce court." Alexander reached for the leather portfolio resting beside him. "That's why I brought records instead of confidence." He placed the portfolio on the polished conference table. Then another. Then another. 3 identical black portfolios appeared one after another. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You came prepared." Alexander nodded once. "I've been organizing these for years." He opened the first binder. Every page was separated by colored tabs. Tax returns, corporate formation, trust documents, property records, insurance policies, investment accounts, business licenses, contracts. Minutes from annual corporate meetings. Victoria had represented founders who owned companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Very few maintained records this carefully. She removed a pair of reading glasses from her desk. "Let's start from the beginning." Alexander slid a certificate of organization across the table. Hall Structural Consulting, LLC. Filed 8 years earlier. Operating agreement. Articles of organization. Federal Employer Identification Number. Annual filings. Every document was complete. Victoria looked up. "You formed the company while you were already married?" "Yes." "Then explain why you aren't concerned." Alexander opened another section. "Because ownership isn't determined by assumptions. It was determined by documents." He explained quietly. Years earlier, after finishing a major municipal bridge project, Alexander had received an opportunity to establish an independent consulting practice. Instead of rushing into business, he spent almost 9 months speaking with accountants, tax attorneys, and business advisors. He planned every detail before filing a single document. The company began with 1 client, then 3, then 12. Within 5 years, Hall Structural Consulting had become one of the most respected boutique engineering firms in Colorado for complex structural rehabilitation projects. Alexander never advertised. Municipal governments called him. Architects referred him. Insurance companies requested forensic engineering reports after severe storms. Word spread quietly. His income increased every year. His lifestyle barely changed. Victoria reviewed profit and loss statements. Revenue had climbed steadily. No sudden spikes, no suspicious transfers, healthy retained earnings, responsible reserves, minimal debt. "This company is extremely healthy." Alexander nodded. I prefer stability. Your wife knows none of this. She knows I work. Does she know how successful the company became? No. Victoria looked over her glasses. You intentionally hid it, Alexander answered immediately. No. The single word carried no defensiveness. He continued. She stopped asking. The sentence lingered between them, not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded true. Years earlier, Aubrey had celebrated every new client Alexander gained. She asked questions, read articles about engineering, even attended an industry banquet with him. Then her own career accelerated. Conversations changed. Eventually, she assumed engineering remained exactly as it had always been. Alexander never corrected her assumptions. He simply kept working. Victoria continued reading. Another document caught her attention. Hall Family Living Trust. Established 6 years earlier. She flipped several pages. Assets, trustees, beneficiary structure, legal amendments. Everything professionally prepared. You created a trust? Yes. Why? Alexander answered without hesitation. My father died without one. He paused. It created unnecessary problems. The memory briefly crossed his face. Not grief, recognition. His father had spent 37 years operating a small construction company. When he passed away unexpectedly, paperwork consumed almost 18 months. Alexander promised himself he would never leave chaos behind. He organized everything long before anyone expected to need it. Not because he anticipated divorce, because engineers anticipated failure before structures experienced stress. Life deserved the same discipline. Victoria nodded slowly. You prepare for possibilities. I prepare so problems remain manageable. She smiled for the first time. You sound more like an engineer than any engineer I've ever met. Alexander almost laughed. I've heard that before. She opened another binder. Inside were digital storage inventories, encrypted backup locations, fireproof document vault records, business succession plans, insurance valuations. There was even a printed inventory showing where every original legal document was physically stored. Victoria quietly leaned back. She had seen wealthy executives lose fortunes because they couldn't locate ownership documents. Alexander could locate any record within seconds. She asked another question. Who handles your accounting? Westbrook and Hines certified public accountants. How long? 11 years. She wrote the firm's name. They've prepared every tax return. Every one. No IRS issues. None. She nodded again. Then something unexpected caught her attention. A sealed envelope marked simply prenuptial agreement. Victoria carefully opened it. The agreement had been signed nearly 13 years earlier. Before the wedding, proper legal representation, separate counsel for both parties, complete financial disclosure, Colorado-compliant notarization. Nothing appeared unusual until she reached Clause 9. Future separately established businesses funded without marital assets remained separate property unless expressly converted into marital ownership. Victoria read the paragraph twice, then a third time. She looked up slowly. Did Aubrey ever ask to amend this agreement? No. Does she remember this clause? I honestly don't know. Victoria closed the folder. Most people don't. Alexander said nothing. He simply waited. She understood why. Facts didn't become stronger because someone repeated them. Documents either existed or they didn't. Victoria organized the folders into neat stacks. Mr. Hall. Yes. I've represented thousands of clients. I imagine you have. I've never seen someone maintain records this consistently. Alexander shrugged lightly. It wasn't difficult. It would be for almost everyone else. He looked toward the window again. I wasn't preparing for divorce. Victoria remained silent. He continued, "I was preparing for uncertainty." That sentence explained almost everything. He hadn't expected Aubrey to leave. He hadn't expected betrayal. He hadn't secretly planned revenge. He simply believed responsible adults documented important parts of their lives. Marriage happened. Business happened. Taxes happened. Illness happened. Death happened. Preparation wasn't pessimism. Preparation was respect for reality. Victoria finally closed the final binder. "I need to ask something." Alexander nodded. "If all of this protects you." She gestured toward the documents. "What exactly do you want?" He answered without needing time to think. "I don't want Aubrey punished." Victoria searched his expression. There was no bitterness, only exhaustion. "I don't want anyone embarrassed," he continued calmly. "I don't want public arguments. I don't want revenge." "What do you want?" Alexander rested both hands on the table. "I want the truth to determine the outcome. Nothing more, nothing less." Victoria slowly smiled. Lawyers heard many speeches. Justice, honor, fairness. Very few clients actually meant those words. Alexander did. She stood and extended her hand. "Then we do this carefully." He stood as well. "No emotional responses. No unnecessary confrontation. No public accusations." Alexander shook her hand once. "Agreed." Victoria gathered the binders into a secure cabinet. Then she spoke one final sentence before ending the meeting. "If Aubrey already believes a story that isn't true," she locked the cabinet door, "don't interrupt her while she's writing the ending." Alexander left the office carrying only one empty portfolio. For the first time since Aubrey had placed the divorce papers on the kitchen island, he felt something unexpected. Not relief, not victory, only clarity. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass towers of downtown Denver. His phone vibrated. A message from Aubrey appeared on the screen. It contained only 6 words. "We need to discuss dividing everything." Alexander looked at the message for several seconds, then slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying. He already understood something Aubrey did not. The conversation had started weeks earlier. Only one of them knew it. Alexander Hall did exactly what Victoria Lawson advised. He did nothing. At least nothing that anyone outside his office could see. He continued driving the same aging Ford F-150 to work every morning. He continued eating homemade lunches prepared the night before. He continued leaving the office just before sunset, unless an emergency structural inspection required him to stay later. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was exactly what Aubrey expected. She interpreted his silence as surrender. By the end of the first week after filing for divorce, she had already begun telling her version of the story. It started with her parents. On Sunday afternoon, Aubrey drove to Littleton to visit them. Her mother poured coffee while her father sat quietly in his favorite recliner, watching a baseball game with the television volume muted. "So," her mother finally asked, "how's Alexander handling everything?" Aubrey sighed dramatically. "Honestly," her mother nodded, "he barely reacted. Maybe he's still in shock." "I don't think so." She stirred her coffee. "I think he just gave up years ago." Her father looked away from the television. "What do you mean?" "He stopped trying. He never wanted more. He was satisfied living the same boring life forever." Her mother frowned. "I always thought he worked very hard." "He works," Aubrey admitted, "but that's all. No ambition. No vision. No excitement." Her father quietly asked, "Isn't he an engineer?" "Yes." "But just an engineer." Alexander was not there to hear those words. If he had been, he probably wouldn't have interrupted. People often revealed themselves most clearly when they believed the other person wasn't listening. The conversation spread from family to friends. 3 evenings later, Aubrey met several co-workers at an upscale wine bar in Cherry Creek North. Crystal chandeliers reflected softly across polished wood tables, while live jazz played in the background. Her closest friend, Melissa Carter, leaned forward. "So, when are you officially free?" Aubrey smiled for the first time in days. "Soon," Melissa laughed. "You deserve better." Another co-worker nodded. "I always wondered how you stayed with someone so ordinary." Aubrey hesitated for only a second. Then she agreed. "I guess I kept hoping he'd change." "What was he making?" someone asked casually. "I honestly don't even know anymore. Engineering salaries aren't terrible." "They're not. But they're nothing compared to pharmaceutical sales." Several women exchanged knowing smiles. One of them raised her glass. "Here's to new beginnings." Everyone toasted. Nobody questioned Aubrey's version. Why would they? Alexander wasn't there. Stories become easier to believe when only one person tells them. Meanwhile, Alexander spent that same evening reviewing structural calculations for a municipal library renovation. At 7:30, he shut down his computer, locked the office, walked into the underground parking garage. His phone buzzed. A text from his younger sister, Emily. "How are you holding up?" Alexander typed only 3 words. "I'm doing okay." Emily immediately called. "You don't sound okay." "I've been better." "I wanted to drive over." "You don't have to." "I know." She paused. "But you're my brother." Alexander smiled faintly. Emily had always understood him better than most people. Not because they talked constantly, because she knew silence wasn't emptiness. It was simply how he processed life. "I heard from Mom," Emily said gently. "She said Aubrey moved out." "Mostly." "You need anything?" "No?" "You sure?" Alexander looked through the windshield toward the lights of downtown Denver. "I'm sure." Emily hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "Are you angry?" Alexander thought carefully before answering. "I'm disappointed." "That's different." "It is." "Do you still love her?" The question lingered. "I love the woman I married." Emily understood immediately. There was no need to explain further. Sometimes 2 sentences carried 12 years of history. After ending the call, Alexander drove home. The house felt noticeably quieter. Half the closet stood empty. Several framed photographs had disappeared. Aubrey had taken decorative furniture, artwork, kitchen accessories. None of it mattered. He reheated leftover chicken soup, sat alone at the kitchen island, opened his laptop. Not to work, to organize digital copies of household records. 1 folder, 1 file, 1 backup. Methodical, calm, exactly as always. Across town, Aubrey continued building another version of reality. Her coworkers listened, her parents sympathized. Neighbors noticed her moving boxes. Everyone reached the same conclusion. Poor Aubrey. Married to a man who never achieved much. It fascinated Alexander how quickly assumptions hardened into facts once repeated enough times, yet he never attempted to correct anyone. Victoria had warned him. Never interrupt people while they're revealing what they genuinely believe. Eventually, those beliefs collide with evidence. Evidence never argues. It simply arrives. A week later, Aubrey met Ryan Whitmore for lunch. Ryan served as regional sales director for the pharmaceutical company overseeing several western states. Tall, confident, always perfectly dressed. He carried himself with effortless certainty. Employees admired him. Competitors respected him. He seemed to possess answers before questions finished being asked. Ryan listened carefully while Aubrey explained the divorce. "So he just accepted it?" She nodded. "1 word." "Fine." Ryan chuckled. "Interesting." "What?" "Men like Alexander usually underestimate divorce." "What do you mean?" "They assume everything will work itself out." He took another sip of sparkling water. They rarely understand the financial consequences. Aubrey leaned forward. So, you'll probably end up with half. Half of what? The house. The retirement accounts. His business. Aubrey frowned slightly. I don't even know what that business is worth. Ryan shrugged confidently. Doesn't matter. If it was built during the marriage, he spread his hands, it's usually divisible. His words sounded authoritative, confident, simple. Exactly the kind of certainty someone wanted during emotional chaos. Aubrey felt reassured. She had no idea Ryan wasn't a family attorney, or that every divorce depended on specific documents rather than confident opinions. Across the city, Victoria Lawson was reviewing Colorado statutes while making detailed notes inside Alexander's case file. Every recommendation she gave rested on verified records, not assumptions. Late Friday afternoon, she called Alexander. I've finished my preliminary review. And you've done something very unusual. Alexander waited. You've preserved almost every financial record from your marriage. I thought it was responsible. It was. Victoria turned another page. I also noticed something interesting. What is it? For nearly 12 years, she paused. Done. You paid almost every major household expense. Alexander wasn't surprised. Mortgage payments, property taxes, home insurance, utilities, vehicle maintenance. Many of them came from his personal accounts before being transferred through the household budget. Not because Aubrey refused, because it was simpler. Neither of them imagined those records would ever matter. Now they did. Victoria continued. I think we should request additional documentation. From whom? The banks? The mortgage company? Retirement custodians? And eventually, she paused deliberately. Anyone who believes your financial life is exactly what it appears to be. Alexander quietly looked toward the family photographs still hanging on the living room wall. One picture showed him and Aubrey standing at Red Rocks Amphitheater shortly after their honeymoon. They looked genuinely happy. No pretending, no hidden resentment. Just two people beginning a future together. He wondered when certainty had slowly replaced curiosity, when assumptions had replaced conversations, when comparison had replaced gratitude. His phone vibrated again. A new email notification appeared. The sender's name caught his attention immediately. First National Mountain Bank. The subject line was unusually brief. Account activity alert. Alexander opened the message. His eyes stopped on one transaction. It wasn't large, but it didn't make sense. Not yet. Alexander read the bank notification twice before closing the email. The transaction itself was not extraordinary. One payment, $486, charged to the joint checking account. The merchant description simply read, Summit Crest Hotel. Alexander frowned. Neither he nor Aubrey had stayed there. At least, not together. He opened the online banking portal using the authentication app on his phone. The charge had cleared 3 days earlier. He checked his calendar. That had been the Tuesday Aubrey claimed she was attending a pharmaceutical leadership workshop in Colorado Springs. Alexander remembered because she had packed an overnight bag. She had kissed him goodbye before sunrise. I'll probably get back late Wednesday. He had nodded without asking questions. He trusted her. There had never been a reason not to. Until now. He closed the banking app, then reopened it. Engineers distrusted assumptions. One unexplained transaction proved nothing. Credit cards were occasionally compromised. Businesses sometimes processed payments incorrectly. There could be dozens of innocent explanations. Victoria Lawson had been very clear. Facts first, conclusions later. The next morning, Alexander arrived at Hall Structural Consulting before anyone else. His executive assistant, Laura Bennett, entered 15 minutes later carrying 2 coffees. She had worked with Alexander for nearly 7 years. Unlike many employees, Laura had long since realized that her quiet employer noticed everything. "Morning." "Good morning," Alexander replied. "You've got the city inspection team coming at 9. "I saw. The Jefferson Hospital project called again. I'll return it after lunch." Laura hesitated. "You doing okay?" Alexander smiled politely. "I'm managing." She nodded. No further questions. That was one reason Laura enjoyed working for him. He never forced personal conversations. She never pried into his private life. Professional respect worked both ways. After reviewing structural drawings until mid-morning, Alexander stepped into a private conference room and called Victoria. "I found something." "Tell me." "A hotel charge." "Amount," he told her. "Date." He gave her the exact date. Victoria remained quiet for several seconds. "One transaction doesn't establish misconduct." "I know. I'm glad you said that before I had to." Alexander almost smiled. "I remember your advice." "Good," she continued. "Download every statement from the last 24 months. "Already started." "Every credit card." "Yes." "Joint accounts." "Yes." "Personal accounts if you have access." Alexander answered calmly. "I have statements for everything that belongs to me." Victoria made another note. "We're not looking for evidence of infidelity. We're looking for financial accuracy." "I understand." "If there are patterns," she deliberately emphasized the word. "Patterns matter." After ending the call, Alexander spent nearly 2 hours downloading financial records. Most people would have found the task exhausting. He found it strangely calming. Documents never exaggerated. Spreadsheets never became emotional. Numbers simply waited to be understood. By late afternoon, hundreds of transactions had been organized into chronological folders: mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, travel, restaurants, professional expenses, joint expenditures. Alexander exported everything into searchable spreadsheets. Only then did he begin reviewing them. The first several months revealed nothing unusual: normal household spending, hardware stores, gas stations, medical appointments. Then he noticed another hotel. Not Summit Crest. Another property. Mountain View Suites. 8 months earlier. 1-night stay. Paid from the same joint account. He searched his calendar again. That week, Aubrey had attended another regional sales conference. Alexander remembered dropping her at the airport. Except, the hotel wasn't near the airport. It was in downtown Denver. He opened another statement. 3 months after that. Another unfamiliar restaurant. Upscale, 2 dinner entrees, expensive wine, valet parking. Alexander searched his own calendar. He had spent that evening inspecting structural damage after a hailstorm nearly 80 miles away. He certainly hadn't eaten dinner there. His heartbeat remained steady. Not because the discoveries meant nothing, because he refused to let emotions outrun evidence. Patterns. Victoria had used that word carefully. Now he understood why. One unexplained payment could be an error. 4, 5, 6, those demanded explanation. Meanwhile, Aubrey believed the divorce was progressing exactly as expected. She had already begun browsing luxury condominiums online. Several co-workers assured her she deserved a fresh start. Ryan Whitmore encouraged her confidence every chance he had. "You've sacrificed enough." "I really have." "You'll finally receive what's fair." She smiled. "I hope so." Ryan leaned comfortably against the conference room table after a weekly sales meeting. "You know." "What?" "Alexander probably doesn't realize how expensive divorce becomes." She laughed softly. "He never paid attention to finances." Ryan found that difficult to believe. Still, he didn't question it. Instead, he continued reinforcing the picture Aubrey already wanted to believe. "You'll probably negotiate from a position of strength." I think so too. Neither of them knew Alexander had already organized years of financial documentation. Neither knew Victoria Lawson had quietly begun building a detailed timeline. Across Denver, Victoria sat inside her office reviewing the spreadsheets Alexander had securely uploaded. She admired one quality above all others: consistency. Every document matched. Dates aligned. Transfers made sense. Household expenses remained remarkably organized. Then one category caught her attention: restaurant charges. Most families rarely kept receipts. Alexander had digital copies. Every business dinner, every anniversary meal, every client lunch. She compared them against calendar entries. Again and again, everything aligned. Until roughly 11 months earlier, small inconsistencies began appearing. Charges Alexander could not have made because documented engineering inspections placed him elsewhere. Not dozens, just enough to notice. Victoria highlighted each one: yellow, then orange, eventually red. She refused to speculate. Instead, she requested supporting documentation from the bank: professional records, merchant confirmations, timestamps, Patience 1 cases. Speculation lost them. Later that evening, Alexander returned home carrying a grocery bag. The refrigerator looked almost empty now. Cooking for one required adjustment. He prepared grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, and rice. Simple, healthy, predictable. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. He opened the front door. Emily stood outside holding a cardboard box. "I brought pie." Alexander blinked. "Pie?" "Mom insisted." He laughed for the first time in days. "Come in." Emily looked around the house. "It feels different." "It does." She placed the pie on the kitchen counter. "You've lost weight." "Probably." "You eating enough?" "I think so." She studied her brother's face. "You've always been impossible to read." Alexander poured coffee for both of them. "I don't feel impossible." "You do." She accepted the mug. "So tell me something honestly." "Okay. Have you hired a lawyer?" Alexander nodded. "Yes." "Good. I met with her twice." Emily seemed relieved. "And she's thorough. You trust her?" "I do." Emily hesitated. "Can I ask another question?" "Always?" "Do you think Aubrey is hiding something?" Alexander stared quietly into his coffee. "I don't know." "But you suspect it?" "I suspect there are transactions I don't understand." Emily immediately frowned. "What kind of transactions?" "I'm not ready to say." "Because you don't know enough." "Exactly." She smiled sadly. "You've always been like this." "Meaning?" "You never accuse anyone until you're absolutely certain." Alexander shrugged. "My father taught me that." Their father had often repeated the same sentence throughout childhood. Measure twice, cut once. It applied to lumber. It applied to engineering. Apparently, it also applied to divorce. After Emily left, Alexander returned to his laptop. The financial timeline had grown considerably. Dates, amounts, locations, merchant names, calendar entries, travel records. Everything placed side by side. He wasn't searching for betrayal anymore. He was searching for consistency. Just after midnight, another pattern suddenly appeared. Several unfamiliar restaurant charges occurred within 24 hours of Ryan Whitmore's scheduled visits to Denver. Alexander stared at the screen. That could still be coincidence. Maybe. But engineers respected coincidence only until mathematics suggested otherwise. He created one more column: Ryan Whitmore travel schedule. Then quietly began filling it in. Alexander did not search Ryan Whitmore's name online. He did not ask mutual acquaintances questions. He did not hire a private investigator. Instead, he opened the pharmaceutical company's public website and downloaded the schedule of industry conferences where Ryan had appeared as a keynote speaker during the previous 2 years. Public information. Nothing confidential. He created a spreadsheet. Column A contained Ryan's confirmed business trips. Column B listed Aubrey's overnight travel claimed for company meetings. Column C recorded the unfamiliar restaurant charges, hotel stays, and miscellaneous expenses from the joint account. One row by itself meant nothing. 2 rows suggested coincidence. 7 rows made coincidence increasingly difficult to defend. Alexander leaned back in his office chair. He still refused to draw conclusions. His father had spent 30 years in construction before becoming a project manager. Whenever a young foreman rushed to blame someone after discovering a crack in freshly poured concrete, his father always said the same thing. The crack tells you where to look. It doesn't tell you why it happened. Alexander lived by that principle. Late that afternoon, Victoria Lawson called. "I've received preliminary responses from 2 financial institutions." "Anything significant?" "Not yet." She sounded thoughtful rather than disappointed. "But something interesting." "What?" "The timestamps." Alexander listened carefully. Many people don't realize that electronic transactions preserve far more information than printed bank statements. She continued. Location identifiers. Merchant terminals. Authorization sequences. Settlement records. Alexander understood immediately. "So we can verify where purchases actually occurred." "Exactly." She paused. "And in several instances," she turned another page. "So, those purchases happened while you were documented somewhere else entirely." Alexander remained silent. Victoria appreciated that. Many clients immediately jumped to emotional conclusions. Alexander simply absorbed information. "We're still building the timeline," she said. "No accusations. No assumptions. Just verified facts. Understood?" Before hanging up, Victoria added one final instruction. "Don't mention any of this to Aubrey." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. People often explain themselves before lawyers ever ask the question." The following weekend, Aubrey attended a networking charity gala hosted by her company at an elegant downtown hotel. Crystal chandeliers illuminated hundreds of guests dressed in formal evening wear. Ryan Whitmore stood near the ballroom entrance greeting executives and regional managers. When Aubrey arrived in a fitted emerald green evening gown, Ryan smiled warmly. "You look incredible." She laughed. "Thank you. How are things progressing?" "The divorce." He nodded. "Smoothly. I think Alexander is just accepting everything." Ryan handed her a glass of champagne. "I told you. Some people never see what's coming." Across the ballroom, several co-workers waved Aubrey towards their table. Throughout the evening, conversations repeatedly returned to her upcoming divorce. Everyone seemed eager to reassure her. "You'll finally have freedom. You deserve someone ambitious. I always thought you were carrying the relationship." Each compliment quietly reinforced the same narrative. Alexander had held her back. No one present had ever met him more than once or twice. None had visited his office. None knew his business. Yet certainty spread through the room as easily as music. Ryan occasionally joined those conversations. He never insulted Alexander directly. Instead, he asked carefully crafted questions. "So, what happens to the house?" "I'll probably keep it." "And the company?" "I suppose I'll receive my share." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "As you should." Those 4 words settled comfortably inside Aubrey's mind. "As you should." She repeated them several times on the drive home. Meanwhile, Alexander spent Saturday replacing damaged fence panels after a windstorm. His elderly neighbor Harold Jensen walked over carrying 2 bottles of water. "Need a break?" Alexander smiled. Always. Harold had lived next door for nearly 18 years. Retired firefighter, widower, direct, honest. He leaned against the fence. "Heard about you and Aubrey. Alexander nodded. News travels. It does. Harold studied the half-finished repair. You okay? I'm getting there. After a moment, Harold said quietly, My wife almost left me once. Alexander looked up. I didn't know that. Most people don't. Harold smiled sadly. We fixed it. I'm glad. But here's something I learned. He pointed toward the damaged fence. When something breaks, don't spend all your energy asking who kicked it. Alexander listened. Figure out whether it can still stand. Alexander considered those words. What if it can't? Harold shrugged. Then build something stronger. Simple advice. No dramatic speeches. Just wisdom earned over decades. On Monday morning, Victoria received another package of financial records. This time, they included merchant verification reports requested through legal channels. She carefully compared transaction identifiers. One hotel payment had been processed using a corporate discount code. Interesting. She requested additional documentation. The discount code belonged to Aubrey's employer. That alone proved nothing. Employees legitimately used corporate rates during business travel. But another detail caught Victoria's attention. The reservation listed 2 registered guests, not 1. She immediately stopped reading. Not because the information lacked importance, because she needed complete documentation before drawing any conclusion. Professional discipline mattered. She called Alexander. I have new information. Should I come in? Tomorrow morning. Is it urgent? No. Important? Potentially. Alexander arrived promptly at 9. Victoria placed a folder on the conference table. I want to show you something. She turned the document toward him. Hotel reservation, corporate rate, check-in, check-out, 2 registered occupants. Alexander looked at the page without changing expression. Victoria watched carefully. Do you recognize the reservation? No. I need to emphasize something. She leaned forward. This document identifies 2 occupants. It does not identify who the second person was. Alexander nodded. I understand. Good. Many clients stop listening after hearing the words 2 guests. Alexander continued reading. Can we identify the second name? Not yet. The hotel declined voluntary disclosure. What happens next? We subpoena records if necessary. Alexander closed the folder. Then we wait. Victoria smiled slightly. You really are patient. I don't enjoy being wrong. Neither did she. That shared mindset made working together unusually easy. Across town, Aubrey met Melissa for coffee. I finally found a condominium I love. Melissa grinned. Already. I wanted a fresh start. What about money? I'm not worried. Melissa stirred her latte. You'll receive a settlement. I'm sure of it. Ryan says the business alone could be worth quite a bit. Aubrey smiled confidently. He probably knows. Neither woman realized Ryan's knowledge came primarily from corporate management rather than family law. Confidence often sounded convincing regardless of expertise. That evening, Alexander returned home to discover an envelope inside his mailbox. No return address. Only his name written neatly across the front. He carried it inside, opened it carefully. 1 folded sheet of paper. Nothing else. Typed in plain black ink were only 2 sentences. You're looking in the wrong direction. Follow the reimbursements. Alexander read the anonymous note 3 times. There was no signature, no explanation, no clue who had sent it. He placed the paper beside his laptop and slowly opened a brand new spreadsheet. The title contained only 1 word: reimbursements. Alexander stared at the anonymous note until nearly midnight. Follow the reimbursements. It was an oddly specific instruction. Not follow the money. Not watch Ryan. Not even your wife is lying. Just 1 word. Reimbursements. He slipped the note into a transparent evidence sleeve before placing it inside the same fireproof cabinet where he stored the rest of his legal documents. Someone had intentionally sent it. Whether that person was trying to help him or manipulate him remained unknown. Either possibility required caution. The next morning, Alexander arrived at his office before sunrise. Laura Bennett noticed the lights already on when she parked her car. She stepped inside carrying breakfast sandwiches. "I figured you skipped breakfast again." Alexander accepted the paper bag with a grateful smile. "Thank you." "You've been here long?" "About an hour." She noticed several spreadsheets covering one of the conference room monitors. "I won't ask." "I appreciate that." She hesitated. "But if you need me to organize documents..." Alexander looked at her. "You've worked with expense reports before." Laura nodded. "For years." "Corporate reimbursements." "Almost every week," Alexander thought carefully. "I may need help locating public reimbursement policies." Laura immediately understood. "Public documents only. Only public documents." "I'll see what I can find." Within an hour, she returned carrying a printed employee handbook downloaded from Aubrey's employer's public careers website. It doesn't include confidential procedures, but it explains the general reimbursement process. Alexander thanked her. The handbook described standard travel policies, approved hotels, meal limits, transportation allowances, conference expenses. Most importantly, every reimbursement request required original receipts and verification of business purpose. Alexander quietly highlighted several paragraphs. Then he opened the financial spreadsheet again. If hotel charges had been paid with the joint account, why would someone mention reimbursements unless... His phone vibrated. Victoria Lawson. "I was just about to call you." "You first," Alexander said. "I've received something from opposing counsel." Alexander listened. "They've requested preliminary financial disclosures?" "Expected." "Yes." Victoria sounded almost amused. "But they've also included a proposed list of marital assets." Alexander smiled faintly. "I imagine it's incomplete." "Extremely." She read several items aloud. The family home, joint savings, retirement accounts, vehicles, household furnishings. Then she stopped. "No mention of the trust." "No mention of several investment holdings." "And they estimated your business value using your engineering salary." Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "So they don't know." "They clearly don't," Victoria continued. "I'm not saying they're acting in bad faith. They're working from the information they believe exists." Alexander nodded. "Which is very different." "Exactly." After hanging up, he returned to the reimbursement question. Public reimbursement policy, joint account charges, corporate hotel rates. Something still didn't connect. Later that afternoon, Victoria received another call. This time it came from opposing counsel. Attorney Daniel Pierce. Professional, experienced, confident. "Victoria." "Daniel, I've reviewed your client's preliminary disclosure." "And very organized." Victoria smiled politely. "He likes records." Daniel laughed. "So I've noticed." They discussed scheduling, document exchange deadlines, property valuations. Nothing unusual. Near the end of the conversation, Daniel casually added, "My client believes this should be a fairly straightforward division." Victoria chose her words carefully. "I've learned not to describe divorces before reviewing all documentation." Daniel chuckled. "Fair enough." Neither attorney revealed strategy. Both understood the conversation beneath the conversation. Across town, Aubrey met Ryan after work. Officially, they were discussing quarterly sales performance. Unofficially, the conversation drifted elsewhere. "So," Ryan asked, "any updates?" "My attorney says everything looks simple." "I'm glad." "I honestly expected Alexander to argue." Ryan smiled. He doesn't strike me as someone who enjoys conflict. He doesn't. She stirred her iced tea absent-mindedly. He almost seems detached. Ryan leaned forward. Sometimes quiet people surprise you. Aubrey laughed. Not Alexander. I've known him 12 years. He avoids confrontation. Ryan nodded but said nothing. His expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Meanwhile, Alexander continued reviewing expense timelines. Near sunset, he noticed another detail. Several unfamiliar hotel charges had disappeared from the joint account only days after appearing. Reversed, replaced, reimbursed. He checked the dates carefully. Initial charge, corporate reimbursement, balance restored. His heartbeat slowed. The anonymous note suddenly made sense. Someone wasn't using the joint account to permanently pay those expenses. Someone was temporarily charging personal funds, then receiving reimbursement later. Alexander immediately called Victoria. I think I understand. Tell me. The hotel charges. Go on. They weren't hidden. They were temporary. Victoria listened closely. The company reimbursed them afterward. Which means, it means the financial loss disappeared. But the records remained. Victoria leaned back. Interesting. Very. But remember, she interrupted gently, a reimbursed business trip can still be completely legitimate. I know, Alexander continued. I'm not questioning the travel. I'm questioning whether every reimbursed trip matched its stated purpose. Victoria smiled. Now you're asking the correct question. The following Friday, the first formal mediation planning session was scheduled, not the divorce itself. Simply an organizational meeting between attorneys and clients. Alexander arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the same navy blazer he had owned for years. No expensive watch, no luxury car, nothing designed to impress. Victoria joined him in the waiting room. You ready? I think so. Remember, she lowered her voice, today isn't about winning. It's about listening. Across the hall, Aubrey arrived with Daniel Pierce. She noticed Alexander immediately. He looked exactly the same. Same jacket, same calm posture, same unreadable expression. For reasons she couldn't explain, that irritated her. She had expected him to appear exhausted, maybe desperate. Instead, he simply nodded politely. Good morning? She answered with a brief nod. Daniel extended his hand. Mr. Hall. Mr. Pierce. Professional introductions. Nothing more. The mediation conference room felt surprisingly ordinary. Large oak table, pitcher of water, legal pads, no courtroom, no dramatic speeches. Victoria began reviewing procedural matters, financial disclosures, property inventories, scheduling deadlines. Daniel agreed with most points. Everything proceeded smoothly. Then, Daniel asked a routine question. Mr. Hall, will you be providing evaluation of your engineering practice? Alexander answered calmly. Yes. Excellent. Daniel smiled. My client estimates it should simplify settlement discussions. Alexander merely nodded. He offered no number, no estimate, no opinion. Victoria noticed Daniel interpreting the silence as cooperation. She knew better. Alexander remained silent because accurate information arrived with documents, not conversation. The meeting concluded less than an hour later. As everyone gathered their papers, Aubrey finally spoke directly to Alexander. This doesn't have to become complicated. He looked at her calmly. I agree. We should just divide everything fairly. I agree. His answers frustrated her. No argument, no emotion, no resistance. As they walked toward opposite elevators, Daniel quietly asked Aubrey, Has your husband always been this calm? She answered immediately. Always? Daniel glanced back once more at Alexander, speaking quietly with Victoria. Something about the exchange bothered him. Experienced attorneys learned to recognize different kinds of clients. Emotional clients panicked. Aggressive clients threatened. Prepared clients listened. Alexander hadn't interrupted once. He hadn't negotiated. He hadn't corrected anyone. He had simply observed. Daniel suddenly realized something he hadn't considered before. People who talk the least during preliminary meetings are sometimes the ones holding the most important information. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria turned toward Alexander. I think opposing counsel just realized they're missing something. Alexander looked at her. What makes you say that? She smiled knowingly. Daniel stopped looking at you. He started looking at your briefcase. Victoria Lawson noticed Daniel Pierce's expression before he managed to hide it. Attorneys developed instincts after years of negotiations. A raised eyebrow, a delayed response, an unexpected glance toward a briefcase. Small reactions often revealed more than carefully chosen words. As soon as the elevator doors closed behind Daniel and Aubrey, Victoria turned to Alexander. He realized something. Alexander adjusted the strap of his leather briefcase. What exactly? He expected confidence. What he found was preparation. Alexander remained quiet. Victoria smiled. You know what makes organized clients dangerous? They remember details. That's part of it. She pressed the lobby button. They don't need to improvise. Outside the office building, they walked toward opposite parking garages. I'll send you another document request tonight, Victoria said. For what? Expense reimbursements. Alexander nodded. I was expecting that. She stopped walking for a moment. I received an anonymous note. Victoria looked directly at him. What kind of note? Alexander reached into his briefcase and handed her a photocopy. She read the 2 sentences without changing expression. You're looking in the wrong direction. Follow the reimbursements. Victoria folded the paper carefully. When did this arrive? 3 nights ago. You kept the original. In an evidence sleeve. She gave a small, approving nod. Good. You don't think it's genuine? I don't know. She paused. But anonymous information should never be trusted. Alexander waited. It should only be verified. Back at her office, Victoria immediately dictated 3 additional discovery requests. Corporate reimbursement records. Travel authorization forms. Conference attendance documentation. Expense approval logs. Every request had a legitimate legal purpose. None accused Aubrey of wrongdoing. Facts first, questions later. Across town, Aubrey drove home, believing the mediation had gone remarkably well. Alexander had not argued. He had not challenged her attorney. He had not objected to anything. She interpreted his silence exactly as she always had. Passive, resigned, predictable. She called Melissa before even reaching home. How did it go? So easy. Really? He barely said anything. Melissa laughed. See, I told you. He knows he can't fight. Aubrey smiled as she pulled into the driveway. I think this will be over sooner than I expected. Neither woman considered another possibility. Some people remained silent because they had nothing to say. Others remained silent because they had not yet reached the right moment. Alexander belonged to the second group. The following Tuesday, Hall Structural Consulting hosted a quarterly leadership meeting. Department managers gathered around the conference table, reviewing project timelines and staffing requirements. No one mentioned Alexander's divorce, not because they didn't know, because he had spent years building a culture where private lives remained private. Near the end of the meeting, Chief Financial Officer Martin Ellis distributed updated financial reports. Our second quarter exceeded projections. Several managers smiled. Martin continued. The Jefferson Hospital expansion alone increased revenue by 18%. Alexander listened quietly. Nothing unusual. Until Martin reached the final page. I also finished restructuring the investment portfolio held through Hall Family Holdings. Alexander glanced up. Good. Martin looked around the room. I'll discuss details with Alex afterward. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. As everyone filed out, Martin remained behind. You wanted to review distributions? Alexander nodded. Let's sit. Martin opened a secure folder. Everything has been transferred. Excellent. The trust continues performing well. Alexander reviewed the summaries. Commercial real estate investments, municipal bonds, engineering consulting dividends, long-term equity positions, years of disciplined planning, nothing extravagant, just consistent growth. Martin finally asked, "How's the divorce?" Alexander looked away from the documents. "It's progressing. You'll need updated valuations." "I know." Martin hesitated. "Should I prepare everything?" "Please." "Complete disclosures," Alexander answered without hesitation. "Everything." Martin nodded respectfully. One reason Hall Structural Consulting enjoyed an exceptional reputation was simple. Alexander never concealed information. He documented it. Later that afternoon, Laura entered Alexander's office carrying another stack of mail. These arrived by courier. He thanked her. Most envelopes contained routine engineering correspondence, permit approvals, inspection schedules, vendor contracts. One envelope carried Victoria Lawson's office logo. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Discovery requests have been served. Now we wait." Alexander folded the letter. Waiting had become strangely familiar. Engineers waited for concrete to cure, steel to arrive, inspection results, weather conditions. Now he waited for truth to emerge. 3 days later, Daniel Pierce called Aubrey unexpectedly. "I've received additional discovery requests." "What kind?" "Travel documentation." She frowned. "For what?" "Business reimbursements." Aubrey laughed. "Why would they want those?" Daniel answered honestly. "I don't know. They're entitled to ask. It shouldn't be a problem?" "It probably isn't." "Still," his voice became thoughtful, "I'd like you to gather everything. Expense reports. Receipts. Conference confirmations." "No problem." After ending the call, Aubrey logged into the company reimbursement portal. Most reports downloaded immediately. Hotel invoices, flight confirmations, meal receipts, mileage claims. Everything appeared organized until she searched for one specific conference from nearly a year earlier. Nothing appeared. She searched again. Still nothing. Her smile faded. Maybe she entered the wrong month. She searched by city. Nothing. That couldn't be right. She distinctly remembered attending. Didn't she? She opened another report, then another. Several conferences existed exactly where expected. One did not. The Denver Leadership Summit, the same week Alexander had recently questioned through bank records. Aubrey stared at the screen. Maybe Human Resources archived older files separately. That had to be it. She closed the browser, but an uncomfortable feeling lingered. Meanwhile, Victoria received the first responses to her newest discovery requests. Most companies required weeks. Some responded faster. One conference organizer confirmed attendance records. Another supplied registration logs. Victoria compared names, dates, hotels, meeting schedules. Then she stopped. One conference listed Aubrey as registered. Another showed payment received. Yet no recorded badge check-in appeared after registration. Interesting. Registration proved someone intended to attend. Badge records suggested no verified entry into the event itself. Again, it proved nothing. People became ill. Flights were delayed. Plans changed. Victoria highlighted the page. Yellow. Not red. Not yet. That evening, Alexander sat on his back porch, watching summer rain move across the neighborhood. Harold Jensen walked over carrying 2 lawn chairs. Mind if I join you? Not at all. The 2 men sat quietly for several minutes, listening to rainfall. Finally, Harold spoke. You know what I admire about engineers? Alexander smiled. I'm almost afraid to ask. They don't panic when a bridge shakes. They measure it. Alexander laughed softly. We do. Harold nodded. Most people think fear disappears because someone's brave. What do you think? I think calm comes from knowing what to measure. Alexander considered that. Maybe that explained why he still slept at night. Not because he knew the answers, because every week produced better questions. Just before going inside, his phone buzzed. A secure message from Victoria. Only 1 sentence appeared on the screen. I think we finally found the first inconsistency that someone cannot explain with a business trip. Alexander received Victoria's secure message just after 8 o'clock that evening. I think we finally found the first inconsistency that someone cannot explain with a business trip. He did not call immediately. Instead, he finished washing the dinner dishes, locked the back door, and made a cup of coffee. Only then did he dial her number. Victoria answered on the second ring. I assumed you'd call. I wanted a clear head first. Good. She sounded pleased. Come by tomorrow morning. I'd rather hear it now. You'll understand better if I can show you the documents. Alexander accepted that without argument. I'll be there at 9. The next morning, Victoria had 3 folders waiting on the conference table. Each was labeled by date rather than subject. She slid the first folder toward him. This is the conference registration. Alexander opened it. Registration confirmation, payment receipt, hotel reservation, everything appeared ordinary. The second folder, Victoria said. Alexander opened it. Attendance records, badge scans, session check-ins, workshop participation. Most conferences now required electronic badge scans to enter presentations. 1 attendee, 1 badge, 1 digital record. Except there wasn't one. No entries, Alexander observed. Victoria nodded. Not a single verified check-in. Could the scanner have failed? It happens. She pushed the third folder forward. This conference required badge scans to enter the hotel ballroom lunch sessions and continuing education seminars. Alexander continued reading. There were 6 different opportunities. Correct. And no record at any of them. Victoria folded her hands. Again, this does not prove she never traveled. It does not prove misconduct. It proves only one thing. Alexander finished the sentence. She registered, but there is no verified evidence that she attended. Victoria smiled. Exactly. The distinction mattered. Lawyers survived by understanding distinctions. Across town, Aubrey sat through a routine regional sales meeting. Ryan Whitmore led the discussion. Sales targets, product launches, territory performance, normal business. When the meeting ended, Ryan asked her to remain behind. You seem distracted. I've just got divorce paperwork. He nodded sympathetically. Anything serious? My attorney requested copies of old reimbursement reports. Ryan looked thoughtful. That sounds routine. I know. But one conference file seems strange. What do you mean? I can't find one reimbursement. Ryan remained perfectly still. Which conference? The Denver Leadership Summit. For the first time since entering the room, Ryan hesitated, only for a fraction of a second. But Aubrey noticed. You remember it? Ryan answered carefully. Honestly, we attended so many events. They all blur together. His smile returned. I'm sure accounting can locate it. She nodded. Probably. But something about his brief hesitation stayed with her. Meanwhile, Alexander returned to Hall Structural Consulting. Martin Ellis was already waiting. I finished the updated valuations. Alexander accepted the folder. Thank you. Martin sat across from him. I've been thinking. About the divorce? Alexander looked up. Martin continued. Your company has always been deliberately quiet. No interviews. No magazine features. No flashy marketing. Alexander smiled. We build bridges. We're not celebrities. Martin laughed. Exactly. But now that privacy is working against assumptions. Alexander considered that. Most people outside the engineering industry had no idea how profitable specialized structural consulting could become. Alexander had never cared. Recognition had never interested him. Competence had. Martin leaned back. Does Aubrey know the current valuation? No. Has she ever asked? Alexander thought for a moment. Not once. Martin slowly shook his head. I can't imagine spending 12 years married to someone and never asking about the business they built. Neither could Alexander anymore. That realization saddened him more than anything discovered in the financial records. At lunch, Emily called. Can we meet? Of course. They met at a quiet cafe near her office. Emily studied her brother carefully. You look different. Tired? No. Stronger. Alexander laughed softly. I don't feel stronger. You seem... She searched for the right word. Settled. Alexander stirred his coffee. I've stopped wondering whether I could have prevented this. Emily nodded. That helps. For a while I kept replaying conversations. What I should have said. What I should have noticed. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Do you still do that? Not anymore. What changed? Alexander answered honestly. I realized a marriage can't survive if only one person keeps asking how to fix it. Emily looked at him for a long moment. I wish Aubrey could hear you say that. So do I. Back at Victoria's office, another package of discovery responses arrived late that afternoon. Corporate accounting records, expense approval summaries, mileage reimbursements. Most matched the documents Aubrey had already agreed to provide. One report did not. Victoria frowned. She read it twice, then a third time. The reimbursement request had been approved. The hotel had been reimbursed. The airfare had been reimbursed. Meals had been reimbursed. But the approving manager's electronic signature had been entered nearly 4 weeks after the supposed business trip. That was unusual. Not impossible. Just unusual. She immediately called the accounting department listed on the document. I'm verifying several reimbursement dates. The payroll supervisor answered politely. Our system changed last year. So delayed approvals occasionally happened. Sometimes. How long? A few days. What about nearly a month silence? That would be uncommon. Victoria thanked her and ended the call. Again, not proof, just another inconsistency. She added another yellow highlight. Across the city, Aubrey opened an old storage box, searching for tax documents requested by Daniel Pierce. Beneath several folders, she found a small leather notebook. Alexander's handwriting filled every page. Not engineering calculations, personal goals, monthly budgets, vacation ideas, anniversary plans. She slowly turned the pages. One entry stopped her. April 14th. Aubrey mentioned wanting to visit Italy someday. Need to start setting money aside. Another. September 2nd. She looked exhausted tonight. Must remember to cook dinner more often during launch season. Another. December 19th. Thinking about surprising her by paying off her student loans early. Need to speak with Martin quietly. Aubrey sat motionless. She had forgotten those conversations years ago. Apparently, Alexander had not. She continued reading. The final completed page had been written only 2 months before she asked for the divorce. Marriage feels quieter lately. I don't know whether she's unhappy with life or unhappy with me. Need to ask. Need to listen. Don't assume. Aubrey slowly closed the notebook. For the first time since filing for divorce, genuine uncertainty replaced confidence. Not about the legal case, about the marriage itself. At nearly the same moment, Alexander received another secure message from Victoria. It contained only a scanned image, no explanation, no commentary, no conclusions. Just one enlarged portion of a reimbursement form. The approving manager's digital signature belonged to Ryan Whitmore. Alexander studied the scanned reimbursement form on his computer screen for nearly 10 minutes before calling Victoria. He never questioned the authenticity of the document. He questioned its meaning. "The approval signature belongs to Ryan Whitmore," he said. "Yes." "Does that prove anything?" "No," Victoria answered without hesitation. "It proves only that he approved a reimbursement request." Alexander leaned back in his chair. "So why send it to me?" "Because it creates a connection." She paused. "A connection is not evidence of misconduct." "But it tells us where to continue looking." Alexander appreciated that distinction. Too many people confused suspicion with proof. Victoria never did. "I'll request additional approval records." "What are you looking for?" "Patterns." Alexander smiled faintly. "Engineers and attorneys really do think alike. We just build different kinds of structures." After ending the call, Alexander closed every file related to the divorce. For the remainder of the afternoon, he focused entirely on engineering. A bridge rehabilitation project outside Denver required immediate revisions after inspectors discovered corrosion in several support members. He spent 4 uninterrupted hours reviewing calculations, stress loads, wind resistance, safety margins. When Laura knocked on his office door at nearly 6, she found him surrounded by structural drawings. "You forgot about the divorce." Alexander looked up. "I suppose I did." She smiled. "That's probably healthy." It was necessary. Real problems still required solving. People would eventually drive across that bridge. The calculations mattered. Across the city, Aubrey continued reading the small leather notebook she had found in storage. Each page felt strangely unfamiliar, not because the handwriting belonged to someone else, because it described a husband she had slowly stopped noticing. One entry read, "Booked dinner reservation for Friday. Hope she isn't working late again." Another, "She smiled today while talking about her new territory. Haven't seen that smile in weeks. Need to encourage her more." Another, "Promotion means more travel. I'll handle things at home." She shouldn't have to worry. Aubrey closed the notebook again. She remembered the promotion. She remembered the travel. She remembered believing Alexander simply accepted more household responsibilities because he lacked career ambition. Now another explanation seemed possible. Maybe he had done it because he loved her. That thought unsettled her. She called Melissa. "I found something." "What?" "Alexander kept journals." Melissa laughed softly. "So, they weren't diaries. They were plans." "What kind of plans?" "For us." Melissa became quiet. "Aubrey, don't. I know what you're going to say. I'm just tired." But after ending the call, Aubrey opened the notebook once more. She could not stop reading. The following morning, Ryan Whitmore reviewed reimbursement approvals from the previous fiscal year. Not because anyone had requested them, because he suddenly remembered Aubrey mentioning the Denver conference. Most reports appeared routine. He scrolled through hundreds of approvals, meals, flights, hotels, mileage. Nothing unusual. Then he located the reimbursement in question. Approved, processed, closed. He stared at the screen. Why had that reimbursement been approved almost 4 weeks after the trip? He honestly couldn't remember. Corporate accounting often delayed paperwork during system upgrades. Still, something about the timing bothered him. He forwarded the file to himself for later review. At Hall Structural Consulting, Martin Ellis entered Alexander's office carrying another valuation report. "I finished everything." Alexander reviewed the updated numbers. Company assets, commercial property, investment accounts, trust valuations. Everything was supported by independent documentation. Martin finally asked, "When did these become part of discovery?" "Soon." "You know what happens then?" Alexander nodded. "Everyone learns the truth." Martin hesitated. "Are you ready for that?" Alexander looked toward the window overlooking the city skyline. "I've been ready for years." Later that afternoon, Victoria received Daniel Pierce's latest response to discovery. Professional, complete, timely. Daniel had produced every document requested from Aubrey except one category: conference attendance verification. He included a short explanation: records unavailable from client. Victoria smiled thoughtfully. Unavailable, not non-existent. She drafted another request, this time directed toward the conference organizers rather than Aubrey. Independent verification mattered. That evening, Daniel called Aubrey. "I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Do you remember attending every conference listed in your expense reports?" She frowned. "I think so." "You think—" "There were dozens." Daniel chose his words carefully. "Opposing counsel appears interested in attendance records." Aubrey's stomach tightened. "I traveled." "I'm sure you did." "But did you attend every scheduled session?" She searched her memory. Business travel blurred together after so many years. Flights, hotels, presentations, client dinners. One conference merged into another. "I honestly don't remember." Daniel appreciated the honesty. "If you don't remember, don't guess. Just tell the truth." After hanging up, Aubrey sat quietly in her living room. For the first time, she realized how much of the past several years had disappeared into airports and hotel rooms. She remembered promotions, sales awards, performance reviews, specific conferences. Not really. Meanwhile, Alexander drove to Harold Jensen's house carrying a toolbox. Harold's porch railing needed repair. The two men worked side by side as the evening sun disappeared behind neighboring rooftops. Harold tightened one of the final bolts. "You've got something on your mind," Alexander smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "You've measured that same board 3 times." Alexander laughed. "Fair enough." He briefly described the reimbursement documents. Not every legal detail, only the general situation. Harold listened patiently. When Alexander finished, the older man asked one question. "What happens if you discover she never intended to hurt you?" Alexander looked surprised. "I hadn't considered that." Harold nodded. "Intent matters. So do consequences. But they're not always the same." Alexander considered those words all the way home. Late that night, Victoria remained alone in her office reviewing newly received conference records. One organizer had finally responded to her subpoena. Attached was an electronic attendance log. She compared names carefully. Then compared timestamps, registration, hotel check-in, no conference badge activity. She continued reading. A separate attachment listed optional networking dinners. Guests signed attendance electronically upon arrival. One signature appeared. "Aubrey Hall," Victoria read further. At the same dinner, another attendee had also signed electronically. Ryan Whitmore. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. Sharing dinner at a corporate networking event was entirely ordinary. The record proved nothing improper. But another column caught her attention. Each attendee's assigned table number. She checked both names again. Table 18, Ryan Whitmore. Table 18, Aubrey Hall. Assigned to the same table, still not evidence of an affair. Still entirely explainable. Still another verified connection. Victoria closed the file. Her investigation had never been about proving infidelity. It had always been about separating assumptions from facts. She reached for her phone and typed a brief message to Alexander. "We now have 3 independently verified connections between Ryan and Aubrey. None prove misconduct, but together they justify expanding discovery." Alexander read the message just before going to sleep. He set the phone on the bedside table without replying. Then his eyes drifted toward the leather notebook Aubrey had accidentally left behind in the house. He had never opened it. He assumed it contained her work notes. For the first time, he wondered whether there were things about his wife that he had never truly known either. Alexander could not sleep. Harold's question echoed through his thoughts. What happens if you discover she never intended to hurt you? Intent mattered. Consequences mattered too. He had spent weeks examining bank statements, reimbursement records, and legal documents. Every page answered one question while creating 2 more. The facts continued growing. The motives remained hidden. At 6 the following morning, Alexander arrived at Hall Structural Consulting before anyone else. Instead of opening the divorce files, he unlocked the cabinet containing projects completed over the past decade. Bridge inspections, hospital expansions, earthquake retrofits. Every project contained thousands of pages. Every calculation could be traced back to its original assumption. Engineers called it maintaining the chain of evidence. Victoria had once joked that lawyers simply borrowed the same philosophy. Nothing should depend on memory if documentation existed. Laura arrived shortly afterward, carrying her usual coffee. "You've been here since dawn again." "I couldn't sleep." She noticed the engineering files. "No legal papers today," Alexander smiled. "I needed a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "That facts solve problems." Laura nodded. "They usually do." Her phone rang before she could say anything else. After a brief conversation, she looked back at Alexander. "Mr. Ellis is here." Martin entered carrying a sealed envelope. "I received something from one of our outside auditors." Alexander accepted it. Inside was an updated independent valuation of Hall Structural Consulting. The estimated value exceeded the previous report by nearly 12%. Martin laughed softly. "Good timing." Alexander looked at the report without emotion. "The timing isn't important. The accuracy is." Martin understood. Most people would have celebrated. Alexander simply filed the document where it belonged. Later that morning, Victoria requested another meeting. This time she spread several documents across the conference table in chronological order. "I want you to notice something." Alexander studied the pages. Conference registrations, expense reimbursements, travel approvals, attendance confirmations. What am I looking for? The dates. He examined them carefully. The approval delays appeared irregular. Some reimbursements were approved within 2 days. Others required nearly a month. One required 31 days, another 28. Then he noticed something else. "They all involve Ryan." Victoria nodded. "Exactly." Every delayed approval had one thing in common. Ryan Whitmore had signed each one. The approvals he didn't handle were processed within normal time. Alexander looked thoughtful. Could that simply reflect his workload? Absolutely. Could it reflect departmental staffing? Also possible. She pointed to another page. "So I asked for company policy." Alexander read silently. Expense reports were expected to be approved within 5 business days, unless additional documentation was required. "Interesting," he said. Victoria leaned back. "Notice my choice of words." I said interesting. I did not say suspicious. Alexander smiled. "I've learned from you." Before they could continue, Victoria's assistant knocked gently. "Daniel Pierce is online too." Victoria excused herself. Alexander remained in the conference room reviewing the documents. Through the partially open door, He heard only fragments of the conversation. Yes. Received yesterday. Happy to cooperate. Additional disclosures. When Victoria returned, her expression had changed. What happened? Daniel just informed me that Aubrey has voluntarily produced another box of personal documents. Alexander looked surprised. Without being asked, apparently. What kind of documents? Personal calendars. Old planners? Travel notebooks? Alexander frowned. Why? Victoria considered the question. Either she's trying to be transparent, or she's trying to remember something herself. Across town, Aubrey sat alone at her kitchen table, surrounded by old appointment books. She had spent the entire previous evening searching through closets and storage bins. Color-coded planners stretched back almost 8 years. Doctor appointments, client meetings, airport departure times, hotel room numbers. She slowly compared one planner against her electronic calendar. Most entries matched. Then she reached the Denver conference. Monday, flight to Denver. Tuesday, leadership summit. Wednesday, client dinner. Thursday, return home. Everything appeared ordinary, until she noticed something written in pencil beneath Tuesday's schedule. Changed hotel. Ask Ryan. She stared at the words. She had absolutely no memory of writing them. Why would she need to change hotels? The conference had already reserved accommodations. She turned the page. Nothing. No explanation, no follow-up, only those 3 words. Ask Ryan. A cold sensation settled over her. She immediately called Ryan. He answered cheerfully. Morning. I found an old planner. So, it says I changed hotels during the Denver conference. Silence. Not long. Perhaps 2 seconds? Long enough. Ryan finally answered. I honestly don't remember. Neither do I. It was years ago. Exactly. He laughed lightly. I'm sure there was a perfectly boring explanation. I suppose. After ending the call, Aubrey remained unconvinced, not because of what Ryan had said, because of what he had not. Normally, Ryan remembered everything. Sales numbers, meeting dates, client names. He had built his reputation on memory. Today he remembered nothing. That alone felt unusual. Meanwhile, Daniel Pierce sat reviewing the newest discovery responses. Something bothered him. Not the documents themselves. Alexander Hall. Throughout weeks of legal proceedings, Alexander had never once attempted to embarrass Aubrey, never accused her, never made emotional allegations, never exaggerated. Instead, every request sought objective records, attendance logs, approval dates, financial statements. Daniel had represented hundreds of divorcing couples. Most spent enormous energy trying to destroy each other. Alexander appeared interested only in understanding what had actually happened. Daniel quietly admired that. He picked up the phone. Victoria. Daniel. I'd like to ask something off the record. I'm listening. Is your client alleging an affair? Victoria answered immediately. No. Daniel paused. Then why all the travel records? Because timelines matter. To what? Victoria's voice remained calm. That's exactly what we're trying to determine. Daniel ended the call more unsettled than before. If the opposing side was not trying to prove infidelity. What exactly were they building late that afternoon? Emily visited Alexander's office unexpectedly. I was nearby. You look serious. She placed a folded newspaper on his desk. A business magazine featured Hall Structural Consulting on the cover, not Alexander. The company's recently completed earthquake-resistant hospital project. You made the cover. Alexander glanced at it. The project did. Emily smiled. Typical answer. He shrugged. The building matters more than my picture. She studied her brother for a moment. Does Aubrey know about this? I don't think so. You didn't tell her. Alexander looked genuinely surprised. I stopped bringing work home years ago. She wasn't interested. Emily looked down at the magazine again. Maybe she never realized what you were building. Alexander answered quietly. Maybe I never realized how little she knew. Just before leaving, Emily placed the magazine back on his desk. Keep it. After she left, Alexander noticed something tucked inside its pages. A yellow sticky note. Emily's handwriting. Sometimes people don't hide the truth. Sometimes they simply stop looking. That evening, Victoria received electronic copies of Aubrey's handwritten planners. She enlarged one scanned page. Tuesday, Leadership Summit, changed hotel, ask Ryan. Victoria immediately compared the handwritten note with hotel billing records already obtained through discovery. Her eyes widened. The conference hotel had never charged Aubrey's room after the first night. Instead, beginning on the second evening, the billing records showed a different downtown hotel, one that had never appeared on the original reimbursement request. Victoria stared at the newly discovered hotel records without allowing herself to reach a conclusion. One missing hotel bill did not establish misconduct. One changed reservation did not prove deception. It simply meant another question required an answer. She enlarged the scanned invoice on her monitor. The conference hotel charged Aubrey's corporate card for one night. The remaining reservation had been canceled before the second evening. A different hotel only 4 miles away appeared on the personal credit card records Alexander had previously obtained through normal financial discovery. Victoria opened another folder. The second hotel had not billed Aubrey's employer. The charges had been paid personally. That distinction immediately caught her attention. Business travel normally remained on corporate accounts. Personal payment suggested one of several possibilities. Perhaps the conference hotel had been full. Perhaps Aubrey wanted a quieter location. Perhaps she had extended her stay privately. All were entirely reasonable explanations. Victoria picked up the telephone. "Rachel, would you come in for a moment?" Her senior paralegal entered carrying a legal pad. "I need you to verify something." Rachel reviewed the documents. "You think she was hiding the hotel?" Victoria immediately shook her head. "I think I don't know why she changed hotels." "There's a difference," Rachel smiled. "Understood. I'll request reservation records." "And don't stop there." Victoria pointed toward the conference documents. "Find out whether transportation was provided between the conference hotel and the alternate hotel. If shuttle service existed, this becomes ordinary. If it didn't," Rachel finished the sentence, "we keep asking questions." Exactly. Across town, Aubrey spent another afternoon sorting through years of accumulated paperwork. For the first time in months, she was no longer looking for documents to support her legal position. She was trying to reconstruct her own memories. Travel itineraries, old boarding passes, hotel keycard sleeves, conference brochures. She spread everything across the dining room table. Most trips blended together. Chicago, Atlanta, Seattle, Denver, Phoenix, hundreds of flights, thousands of conversations. An entire career lived inside airports. She eventually found an envelope labeled Denver. Inside rested a folded concierge map from the second hotel. Someone had circled a nearby restaurant in blue ink. There was no name, no note, nothing except the circle. She stared at it. "I don't remember this." The silence in the house offered no answer. At Hall Structural Consulting, Alexander finished reviewing structural calculations for a municipal bridge replacement when Martin knocked lightly on the office door. I've been thinking about something." Alexander looked up. "That's usually dangerous." Martin laughed. "Not today." He placed a newspaper article on the desk. It discussed corporate transparency during high-profile legal disputes. "Read the highlighted paragraph." Alexander did. Companies that maintain complete internal documentation often resolve legal conflicts more quickly because objective records reduce factual disputes. Alexander folded the article. "Nothing surprising." "No, Martin sat down. But it reminded me of you. Alexander raised an eyebrow. How? You've documented almost every business decision for 15 years. Martin looked around the office. Sometimes I wondered whether you were overly cautious. And now? Now I think you simply understood that memory fades. Alexander nodded slowly. My father taught me that. If something matters, write it down. Martin smiled. Wise man. He was. Late that afternoon, Daniel Pierce received copies of the newest discovery requests, alternate hotel reservations, transportation receipts, parking records, restaurant invoices. He leaned back in his chair. The requests remained narrowly tailored, professional, specific. Nothing resembled a fishing expedition. He finally called Victoria. I've reviewed your latest requests. Any objections? Not yet. Daniel hesitated. Can I ask you something? You can. Do you actually believe my client intentionally concealed anything? Victoria answered carefully. My beliefs are irrelevant. I care about what the records ultimately establish. Daniel appreciated the answer. So do I. After ending the call, he looked again at Aubrey's file. His responsibility was protecting her legal interests. That responsibility also required understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the evidence. If uncomfortable facts existed, ignoring them would help no one. Meanwhile, Ryan Whitmore received an unexpected email from corporate accounting. Subject: historical expense verification. He opened it immediately. The accounting department requested confirmation regarding several reimbursement approvals from previous fiscal years. Because of an external legal inquiry, Ryan read the list twice. Denver, Seattle, Boston, 3 conferences, all involving Aubrey. His pulse quickened, not because he believed he had done anything improper, because he genuinely could not remember why certain approvals had been delayed. He searched archived emails. Hundreds appeared. Most had already been deleted under routine retention policies. One survived. The subject line read, Hotel Change, Denver. Ryan opened it. The message contained only 3 sentences. Aubrey Conference Hotel overbooked. Use the Harborview instead. I'll explain tomorrow. R. Ryan stared at the screen. So that's what happened. Relief washed across him. He finally remembered. The original conference hotel had experienced a plumbing failure affecting several guest floors. Attendees had been relocated throughout downtown. He immediately searched online archives from that year. Within minutes, he located an old local newspaper article. Water main break forces temporary evacuation at downtown convention hotel. Ryan leaned back in his chair. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. There had been an explanation all along. The following morning, he forwarded both the archived email and the newspaper article to Daniel Pierce with a brief note. Thought these might answer recent discovery questions. Daniel read the materials carefully. Interesting. Very interesting. The alternate hotel now had a documented explanation. That removed one significant mystery. He immediately forwarded copies to Victoria. Professional courtesy mattered. Facts belonged to both sides. Victoria received the email just before lunch. She read every attachment. Then she smiled to herself. Not because the explanation hurt her case, because it strengthened the investigation. One mystery had been resolved. That meant they could eliminate a false lead. She called Alexander. I have good news. He sounded surprised. Good news. The alternate hotel now has an explanation. Alexander listened quietly while she summarized the water main break and relocation email. When she finished, he asked only one question. So we remove it from the timeline. Immediately. No reason to waste time chasing something already explained? Alexander felt unexpectedly relieved. I was hoping you'd say that. Victoria laughed softly. You sound happy. I am. Why? because I don't want the truth to depend on coincidences. Neither of them noticed the deeper significance of that conversation. Alexander was no longer hoping to prove Aubrey wrong. He was hoping to discover where she had been right. That subtle change mattered. That evening, Aubrey received a call from Daniel. I found the explanation for the hotel change. She listened carefully. When he mentioned the plumbing failure, fragments of memory returned. People standing in the lobby, suitcases everywhere, conference staff apologizing, buses transporting guests. Oh, I remember now, Daniel smiled. I thought you might. She felt an enormous sense of relief. For nearly 24 hours, she had feared she had forgotten something far more serious. Instead, the explanation had been ordinary. After ending the call, she walked into the garage, searching through another storage box. If one forgotten memory could return with documentation, perhaps others could as well. At the very bottom of the box lay an old company-issued mobile phone she had not seen in years. The battery was dead. The charger remained wrapped around it. She stared at the device for several long seconds. Every business text message from those years had once lived inside that phone. If it still worked, it might answer questions that neither memory nor paperwork ever could. Aubrey placed the old company phone on her kitchen counter and searched through every drawer until she found a compatible charging cable. Dust covered the screen. The battery icon remained dark. She plugged it into the wall and waited. Nothing happened. She switched outlets. Still nothing. Finally, after nearly 5 minutes, a tiny charging symbol appeared. She exhaled slowly. Please work. The phone had not been powered on for almost 4 years. If the memory had survived, it might answer questions no paper record could. If it had failed, another piece of the past would remain permanently inaccessible. Across town, Alexander sat with Victoria reviewing the latest exchange of discovery documents. She placed Daniel Pierce's email beside the newspaper article describing the hotel's plumbing emergency. I appreciate this. Alexander looked surprised. The article. The professionalism. Victoria tapped Daniel's email. He could have forced us to spend time subpoenaing documents everyone now knows exist. Instead, he volunteered them. Alexander nodded. That probably saved everyone several weeks. It also tells me something. What? Victoria folded her hands. Daniel believes the truth helps his client. Alexander considered that. Or he believes hiding ordinary facts makes extraordinary allegations look stronger. Exactly, she smiled. We're dealing with competent counsel. Neither of them saw that as a disadvantage. Competent lawyers reduced unnecessary conflict. That often made difficult cases easier to resolve. Later that afternoon, Daniel met with Aubrey in his office. She placed the old company phone on the conference table. I finally found it. Daniel looked at the device. Does it still work? I don't know. It just started charging. She explained her hope that old text messages might help reconstruct forgotten business trips. Daniel listened carefully. When was the last time you used this phone? The month before I received my current one. And nothing has been deleted. I honestly don't remember. Daniel nodded. If the information still exists, we'll preserve it before opening anything. You think it's important? I think evidence deserves to be handled properly. He contacted a digital forensic specialist, not because anyone suspected wrongdoing, because preserving electronic evidence correctly prevented future disputes. Meanwhile, Ryan Whitmore sat alone in his office reviewing archived emails from years earlier. The hotel relocation mystery had been solved. But another detail caught his attention. Several conversations with Aubrey ended abruptly. Entire threads were missing, not deleted intentionally, simply lost during the company's migration to a new email system. He rubbed his forehead. So much history disappeared. He suddenly realized how unreliable memory truly was. He remembered Aubrey working long hours. He remembered helping junior sales representatives. He remembered conferences. But the exact sequence, specific conversations, individual decisions, much less than he had believed. For the first time, Ryan wondered whether everyone involved had been reconstructing the past according to emotion rather than fact. At Hall Structural Consulting, Laura entered Alexander's office carrying an envelope. This arrived by courier. There was no return address. Alexander opened it carefully. Inside rested a single flash drive. No letter, no explanation, only a handwritten label. Denver. Laura frowned. Should we connect it? Alexander immediately shook his head. Not directly. He picked up the phone. Victoria. She answered immediately. I've received an anonymous flash drive. Don't open it. I wasn't planning to. I'll arrange forensic imaging. Alexander smiled. We're becoming predictable. Predictability keeps evidence admissible. An hour later, a digital forensic consultant collected the device. No one viewed its contents. No one guessed what it contained. Procedure came first. That evening, Emily invited Alexander to dinner. For the first time in months, they discussed subjects unrelated to the divorce. Her children, his latest engineering project, their late father's woodworking hobby. Near dessert, Emily finally asked, "Do you miss her?" Alexander looked out the restaurant window before answering. "I miss who I thought we were." Emily remained silent. "I don't know whether that version of us ever really existed." She reached across the table. "That's an honest answer." I've had a lot of practice recently." Across the city, Aubrey watched the old phone complete its startup sequence. The company logo appeared, then the home screen. Thousands of unread memories waited behind tiny icons. She hesitated. Instead of opening messages immediately, she switched the phone into airplane mode. No accidental synchronization, no automatic deletions. Tomorrow, the forensic specialist would create a complete copy. Everything would be preserved. She placed the phone back on the table. For reasons she could not explain, she suddenly felt nervous. Not because she expected to discover betrayal, because she feared discovering how much of her own life she had forgotten. The next morning, Victoria received the forensic imaging report regarding the anonymous flash drive. No malware, no evidence of tampering. The copied contents consisted of only one folder: conference photos. Victoria asked the consultant to open the duplicated copy while preserving the original. Hundreds of digital photographs appeared. Conference registration desks, networking events, lecture halls, group dinners. Nothing unusual. The images had clearly been taken by the conference's official photographer. Victoria began sorting them chronologically. Morning keynote, vendor exhibits, lunch presentations, evening reception. Then she noticed something unexpected. One photograph captured Aubrey speaking with several attendees near an engineering display. Ryan stood several feet away talking with another group. Ordinary. Another photograph. Aubrey sitting alone during a presentation. Ordinary. Another. Ryan speaking from the stage. Ordinary. The photographs contradicted the growing assumption that Ryan and Aubrey had spent every moment together. Instead, they appeared to participate independently throughout most of the conference. Victoria continued reviewing the images. Near the end of the folder, she stopped. Not because she found anything romantic, because she recognized another face. She enlarged the photograph. Standing beside Aubrey during an afternoon networking session was a woman wearing an exhibitor badge. The name was partially visible. Elaine Foster. Victoria searched her notes. The name meant nothing. She searched conference registration records. Elaine Foster, structural materials consultant. Denver Infrastructure Solutions. Victoria leaned back. Why would Aubrey, a pharmaceutical sales manager, spend nearly 40 minutes speaking with someone from a structural engineering company? The connection seemed completely unrelated. She called Alexander. "I've found someone new." "Who?" "I don't know yet." She emailed him the photograph. Alexander opened the image on his computer. His eyes narrowed immediately. "I know her." Victoria straightened in her chair. "You do." "Not well." But Hall Structural Consulting hired Denver Infrastructure Solutions on 3 bridge inspections. He zoomed in further. Elaine Foster was their project coordinator. Victoria felt the investigation shift beneath her feet. For weeks, every document had pointed toward Aubrey and Ryan. Now, for the first time, an entirely different connection had appeared, one that reached directly into Alexander's own professional world. Alexander kept the photograph open on his monitor while Victoria waited on the phone. Elaine Foster stood beside Aubrey, near a display of structural materials. Their conversation appeared serious. Aubrey held a brochure. Elaine pointed toward a diagram. Neither woman looked toward the camera. "You said your company worked with Elaine," Victoria asked. "3 projects." "How recently?" "The last one ended about 5 years ago." "Before the Denver conference, roughly 6 months before it." Victoria made a note. "Did Aubrey know Elaine?" "Not through me." "Are you certain?" Alexander thought carefully. "I never introduced them." "That isn't the same as saying she didn't know her." "No." He enlarged the image again. The display behind them promoted corrosion-resistant reinforcement systems. Those materials were used in bridges, hospitals, and industrial facilities. They had no obvious connection to Aubrey's pharmaceutical work. Victoria asked, "Would Elaine have known Aubrey was your wife?" "Possibly." "Your company name appeared on the projects." "But my marriage wasn't relevant." Victoria remained silent for a moment. "Do you still have Elaine's contact information?" "Probably." "Don't call her." "I wasn't planning to." "We need an independent record before anyone's memory changes." Alexander understood. "Subpoena first." "Not immediately. I'll ask Daniel whether Aubrey remembers the conversation. If she does, that may save everyone time." Across town, Daniel Pierce was supervising the forensic extraction of Aubrey's old company phone. The specialist connected the device to an isolated computer. Aubrey watched from the opposite side of the room. "How long will the copy take?" she asked. "Several hours?" "Will you read everything?" "Only material relevant to the agreed search terms." Daniel had already negotiated a protocol with Victoria. Messages involving business travel. Ryan Whitmore conference, scheduling reimbursements, and certain dates would be collected. Private conversations unrelated to the case would remain protected. Aubrey appreciated that. Still, the thought of strangers searching her old messages made her uncomfortable. Daniel noticed. "This is voluntary. We can stop." Aubrey shook her head. "No. I want the truth, too." Daniel studied her expression. For the first time since she hired him, she did not sound interested in winning. She sounded interested in understanding. At Hall Structural Consulting, Martin entered Alexander's office carrying a project archive. "You asked for the Denver infrastructure files." Alexander pointed toward the side table. "Put them there." Martin noticed Elaine's photograph on the monitor. "That's Elaine Foster." "You remember her?" "Of course. She handled nearly every coordination issue. Very organized." Alexander opened the first project file. Invoices, meeting minutes, inspection reports, email chains. He searched for anything connecting Elaine to Aubrey. Nothing appeared. Martin leaned against the table. "Why does she matter?" Alexander explained the conference photograph. Martin frowned. "That is unusual." Unusual isn't evidence. I know. Martin reviewed the image again. Maybe Aubrey was asking about your work. Alexander looked at him. What? She might have recognized the company name. Denver Infrastructure Solutions was listed on our project announcements. Alexander had not considered that. Why wouldn't she ask me? Martin answered gently. Maybe she wanted to understand before asking. That possibility created an emotion Alexander could not name. Hope felt too generous. Regret felt closer. Meanwhile, Victoria contacted Daniel. I found a photograph showing Aubrey speaking with Elaine Foster. Daniel wrote down the name. Who is she? A coordinator for an engineering consultant that worked with Alexander's company. Daniel paused. You're suggesting Aubrey investigated her husband's business. I'm suggesting nothing. I want to know whether she remembers the conversation. Daniel agreed to ask. He found Aubrey still waiting outside the forensic room. Do you know a woman named Elaine Foster? Aubrey stared at him. The name seemed familiar. Engineering? Yes. A memory returned in fragments. A conference exhibit. A bridge diagram. A woman with silver-framed glasses. I spoke to her in Denver. Why? Aubrey closed her eyes. I saw Hall Structural Consulting listed on a project sheet. Daniel waited. I recognized Alexander's company. So you asked about it? Yes. Her voice became quieter. Elaine said Hall Structural was one of the best firms she had ever worked with. Daniel said nothing. Aubrey continued. She said Alexander personally identified a design flaw that prevented months of delays. She called him brilliant. The memory sharpened. I thought she had confused him with someone else. Daniel looked surprised. Why? Because Alexander never talked about major projects. He always said work was fine. Busy, but fine? She looked down at her hands. I didn't understand that he was running something important. Daniel asked carefully. Did you tell Alexander about the conversation? No. Why not? Aubrey's face tightened. Because I felt embarrassed. The answer came before she could soften it. I had spent years believing he lacked ambition. Then a stranger described a man I didn't recognize. She looked toward the forensic room. I decided Elaine was exaggerating. Daniel now understood why the conversation had lasted nearly 40 minutes. Aubrey had not been discussing pharmaceuticals. She had been learning about her husband. Did you speak with Elaine again? I don't remember. Daniel wrote nothing for several seconds. Then he called Victoria and relayed the explanation. Victoria listened without interrupting. When the call ended, she went directly to Alexander's office. He was standing near the window when she arrived. Aubrey remembers Elaine. Alexander turned. Victoria summarized the conversation exactly as Daniel had described it. She did not dramatize. She did not interpret. When she finished, Alexander remained motionless. She thought Elaine had confused me with someone else. Apparently. He looked towards the photograph again. That might be the most painful thing we've found. Victoria understood. Financial disputes could be resolved. Property could be divided. But discovering that your spouse could not recognize your accomplishments was different. There's more, Victoria said. Alexander waited. The forensic search of Aubrey's old phone produced preliminary results. Anything relevant? One message thread. Between Aubrey and Ryan? No. Victoria placed a printed page on his desk. The conversation was between Aubrey and Elaine. It occurred 2 days after the Denver conference. Elaine had sent a link to an industry article about Hall Structural Consulting. Aubrey replied, "Thank you. Please don't mention that I asked. I need time to understand why my husband never told me any of this." Alexander read the message twice, then a third time. Below it was Elaine's response. Maybe he tried. Maybe you stopped listening. Alexander slowly placed the page on the desk. For the first time since the divorce began, the evidence did not point toward betrayal. It pointed toward a conversation Aubrey had hidden because she had begun questioning everything she believed about him. Victoria's phone rang. She answered. The forensic specialist spoke for less than a minute. When the call ended, her expression hardened. "What is it?" Alexander asked. They found a second message thread. "Between whom?" Victoria looked directly at him. "Aubrey and someone saved only as AH." Alexander felt his chest tighten. Those were his initials. But the phone number was not his. Alexander stared at the unfamiliar phone number beneath the initials AH. "Are you certain it isn't mine?" he asked. Victoria slid the forensic summary across his desk. The number was registered to a prepaid account. Activated 6 years ago. Cancelled 18 months later. Alexander read the first recovered message. "You should know more about the man you married." The sender had written it 3 days after the Denver conference. Aubrey replied, "Who is this?" The response came 14 minutes later. "Someone who worked with Alexander before you understood what he was building." Alexander's expression remained controlled, but his hand stopped moving. "That sounds personal." Victoria nodded. "It also sounds deliberately vague." "How many messages?" 27 recovered. Most were deleted from the visible conversation, but the forensic image preserved database fragments. Alexander continued reading. AH sent links to engineering awards, municipal contracts, and Hall structural consulting project announcements. Aubrey repeatedly asked for a name. The sender refused. At one point, Aubrey wrote, "Why are you sending this to me?" The answer was immediate, because he deserves a wife who sees him. Alexander pushed the pages away. Whoever wrote this wanted to create conflict. Possibly. Or wanted her to ask questions. Victoria kept her tone neutral. Intent is still unclear. Across town, Aubrey sat beside Daniel while the forensic specialist explained the recovered thread. Her face had gone pale. "I forgot about those messages." Daniel looked at her carefully. "Do you remember them now?" "Some of them." "Who was AH?" "I never knew." "Did you believe it was Alexander?" "No." "The messages criticized me for not understanding him." She looked down. "At first I thought it was someone from his company. Then I thought it might be a former client." Daniel asked, "Why did you delete the thread?" Aubrey closed her eyes. "Because Ryan saw one of the messages." Daniel became still. "How?" "We were reviewing a presentation. My phone was beside the laptop. A message appeared." "What did it say?" Aubrey swallowed. "Your husband is more successful than everyone in this room." Daniel let the silence remain. "What did Ryan do?" He laughed. "He said whoever sent it was probably Alexander trying to impress me anonymously." Did you believe him?" "Eventually." The answer sounded weak even to her. Daniel folded his hands. "What happened next?" "Ryan told me successful people didn't hide accomplishments. He said if Alexander had built anything important, I would already know." Aubrey looked toward the old phone. "I deleted the conversation that night." The forensic specialist remained focused on the screen. "There is another technical detail." Both turned toward him. The sender's number was prepaid, but several messages contain embedded metadata from shared files. "Can you identify the source?" "Not yet." But one document was created on a computer using the username E.Foster. Aubrey's eyes widened. Elaine Daniel immediately called Victoria. An hour later, both attorneys arranged a joint interview with Elaine Foster. No subpoena, no confrontation. A voluntary video conference with counsel present. Elaine appeared on screen from a modest office in Denver. Her silver-framed glasses matched the conference photograph. She listened while Victoria explained the purpose of the call. Then Victoria asked directly, "Did you send anonymous messages to Aubrey Hall?" Elaine did not hesitate. No. Did you provide documents to someone who might have? Possibly. Who? Elaine leaned back. This was years ago. I need context. Alexander remained silent beside Victoria. Elaine saw him on screen and smiled faintly. Mr. Hall. Miss Foster. You probably don't remember me. I remember your work. That answer seemed to affect her. Elaine continued. After the conference, Aubrey contacted me. She asked about Hall Structural. I sent her public articles. Nothing confidential. Did anyone else know about the conversation? My supervisor at the time. Name. Andrew Hale. The initials settled over the meeting. A.H.? Victoria asked. What was Mr. Hale's relationship with Alexander? Elaine looked uncomfortable. Professional. Be precise. Andrew Hale had once been a senior engineer at Denver Infrastructure Solutions. He had worked on 2 projects with Hall Structural Consulting. According to Elaine, he respected Alexander's technical ability, but resented Hall Structural's rapid growth. He believed Alexander received too much credit, Elaine said. For what? For identifying a foundation defect on a hospital expansion. Andrew had reviewed the same plans earlier and missed it. Alexander remembered the project. The flaw had involved soil settlement beneath an emergency wing. Correcting it early prevented serious structural damage. Victoria asked, why would Andrew contact Aubrey? Elaine shook her head. I don't know. But he asked me strange questions after the conference. What questions? Whether she seemed surprised by Alexander's reputation. Whether she knew how valuable his company was. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Valuable. Elaine nodded. Andrew followed industry acquisitions. He knew several firms had approached Hall Structural. Victoria wrote something down. Did you give Andrew Aubrey's phone number? No. But the conference directory listed attendee contact information. Daniel entered the conversation. Was Andrew at the Denver conference? Elaine hesitated. Not officially. What does that mean? He wasn't registered. But he lived nearby. He joined several people for drinks after the second day's sessions. Was Aubrey present? For part of the evening. Aubrey spoke for the first time. I don't remember him. Elaine answered gently. You were introduced to many people. He may not have made an impression. Victoria requested permission to show Elaine the recovered messages. Elaine read them slowly. Her expression hardened. This sounds like Andrew. You recognize his style. The superiority. The indirect insults. He often pretended to help people while making them doubt themselves. Alexander finally asked, where is he now? Elaine looked toward another screen. I believe he left engineering. Why? He was investigated for altering project documentation. The room became silent. Was he charged? Victoria asked. No. The company settled privately with a client. Andrew resigned. Victoria closed the message file. The investigation had shifted again. The anonymous sender might not have wanted Aubrey to appreciate Alexander. He might have wanted her to realize Alexander's value before the divorce. That possibility made no sense until Elaine added one final fact. Andrew contacted me last month. Alexander leaned forward. About what? He asked whether Hall Structural was still privately owned. Victoria's voice sharpened. What did you tell him? Nothing. Elaine looked directly at Alexander. But he said something strange. He said a divorce could accomplish what acquisition offers never had. Alexander remained motionless. Victoria understood immediately. If Andrew knew about the divorce, knew the company's value, and believed marital litigation might expose ownership information, then the anonymous messages were not merely personal interference. They may have been the beginning of a much longer strategy. Before the meeting ended, Elaine forwarded one recent email from Andrew Hale. The subject line contained only 4 words. Is Alexander ready to sell? Life has a quiet way of revealing the truth, not all at once, but one choice, one conversation, and one discovery at a time. We often judge the people closest to us based on what we see on the surface, forgetting that everyone carries silent sacrifices, private battles, and untold achievements. Sometimes the greatest mistake is not betrayal or failure, but assuming we already know someone's story without taking the time to truly listen. Trust is built through communication, not assumptions. Respect grows when we choose curiosity over judgment, and love cannot survive where appreciation has disappeared. At the same time, this story reminds us that truth does not fear careful examination. Facts may take time to uncover, but patience, honesty, and integrity will always outlast rumors, pride, and manipulation. Even when life feels unfair, responding with dignity instead of revenge protects something far more valuable: our own character. Perhaps the most powerful lesson is this: never wait until someone is walking away to discover their worth. The people we love deserve to be seen, heard, and appreciated while they are still standing beside us. A simple conversation today may prevent a lifetime of regret tomorrow. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on your own life, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinion in the comments. What do you think is the biggest mistake Alexander and Aubrey made? Your perspective may inspire someone else. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about love, trust, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.